The wind rolled across the prairie like a restless ocean, bending the tall grass into silver waves beneath the pale morning sun. Dust rose from the wagon wheels as they creaked toward the small railroad town that barely marked itself on the map. It was a place where men came chasing land, cattle, and second chances. It was not a place that expected surprises. Yet that morning, a surprise arrived. Her name was Eliza Harper, though few would remember it at first. She stepped down from the train platform with a small brown suitcase clutched tightly in her gloved hands. Her dress was simple, carefully mended at the sleeves. She looked around at the wide sky, the rough wooden buildings, and the unfamiliar faces. Every step she took felt like it echoed with the weight of someone else's dream. She wasn't supposed to be there. The mail-order arrangement had been made months earlier. Letters exchanged between a widowed rancher named Thomas Whitaker and a woman named Caroline Harper from back east. Caroline had written of her gentle nature, her skill in running a household, and her longing for a steady life on open land. Thomas had written of his modest ranch, his need for companionship, and his promise of honesty. But Caroline never boarded the train. Instead, on the morning of departure, fear overtook her. The thought of crossing half a country to marry a man she had never seen proved too much. She wept and confessed to her younger sister that she could not go through with it. Their father had passed the previous winter, leaving debts and little protection for two unmarried women. The advertisement had seemed like salvation. Now it felt like a cliff's edge. Eliza had listened quietly as her sister trembled. "Please," Caroline had begged. "If I don't go, we'll have nothing. They've already paid for the ticket. I can't face him. I can't." Eliza was the quieter sister. Less striking, less outspoken. She had always been the one to mend torn hems, to balance accounts, to comfort rather than to demand comfort. That morning, she made a decision that would alter everything. "I'll go," she said. Not because she dreamed of romance. Not because she believed in fairy tales. But because someone had to. And so she stood on that platform in the dusty western town, carrying her sister's name in her pocket and her own doubts in her heart. Thomas Whitaker arrived late. He rode in on a tall bay horse, broad-shouldered and stern-faced, his hat low against the glare. He had been married once, years ago. Fever had taken his wife and unborn child within days of each other. Since then, the ranch had grown quiet, the house emptier than any field. When he dismounted and approached the platform, his eyes scanned for the woman from the letters. He had memorized Caroline's description: chestnut hair, lively eyes, a laugh she claimed could chase away sorrow. Eliza stepped forward. "Mr. Whitaker?" she asked softly. He studied her. The hair was darker than described. The eyes were gray, not green. The smile was hesitant, not lively. "Yes," he answered slowly. "And you are?" She swallowed. The truth pressed against her ribs like a trapped bird. "I'm Eliza Harper." The name hung between them like a misfired shot. His expression hardened. "I was expecting Caroline Harper." "She couldn't come," Eliza said, forcing herself to hold his gaze. "She fell ill." It was not entirely a lie. Fear was a kind of illness. Thomas's jaw tightened. He had spent months preparing, building a second wardrobe chest, clearing out his late wife's sewing room, writing letters that revealed more of his loneliness than he'd ever admitted aloud. "You're not the woman I agreed to marry," he said bluntly. A few townsfolk had begun to notice. Whispered curiosity drifted on the wind. Eliza felt heat rise to her face. "No, sir. I'm not." He turned slightly away, rubbing a hand across his beard. "This isn't how it works." "I know," she said quickly. "I can repay the train fare. I'll find work in town." "With what money?" His tone wasn't cruel, just realistic. She had no answer. Silence stretched long and uncomfortable. The platform seemed suddenly too small, the sky too wide. From behind Thomas came another voice. Low, steady, and unexpected. "I'll take her." Both of them turned. The speaker was Daniel Carter, a neighboring rancher known for his quiet ways and stubborn independence. He wasn't as wealthy as Thomas, nor as outwardly commanding. But his land was strong, his cattle healthy, and his reputation clean. Thomas frowned. "This isn't a stray horse, Daniel." Daniel's eyes rested on Eliza, not with appraisal, but with consideration. "I know that." He addressed her directly. "Do you wish to marry?" The question stunned her. No poetry, no promises, just plain truth. She considered lying again, considered saying she'd return home somehow. But home had no safety waiting. I wish to work, she answered honestly, and to belong somewhere I'm wanted. Daniel nodded once. That's fair. Thomas exhaled sharply. You don't even know her. Daniel shrugged slightly. Neither did you. A few chuckles rippled among the watching townspeople. Thomas studied Daniel, then Eliza. Finally, he lifted his hands in resignation. It's your decision. It was more than that. It was her entire future. Eliza looked at Daniel. His clothes were worn, but clean. His gaze steady. There was no desperation in him, no attempt to claim something that wasn't his. Just an offer. I don't want to cause trouble, she said quietly. You're not, he replied. Trouble usually announces itself louder. Something in her chest loosened. All right, she whispered. The town buzzed for days afterward. The rejected bride. The unexpected groom. The sister who came in another's place. Stories shifted with each retelling, gaining color and judgment. Some pitied her. Some doubted her. Some whispered that she had tricked both men. But Daniel paid no mind to gossip. Their wedding took place in the small white church 3 days later. No grand celebration. No orchestra. Just a handful of witnesses and a preacher who stumbled once over her name before correcting himself. Eliza Carter. The name felt foreign and fragile. Life on Daniel's ranch was not easy. The house was smaller than Thomas's, the land rockier. Mornings began before sunrise. Water had to be hauled. Fences repaired. Chickens fed. Bread kneaded by hand. Eliza worked without complaint. She had grown up understanding that survival often required silent strength. When a storm tore part of the barn roof loose, she climbed the ladder beside Daniel to hold planks steady against whipping wind. When a calf fell ill, she stayed awake through the night warming it by the stove. Daniel watched her carefully during those first weeks. Not with suspicion, but with curiosity. You don't speak much about home, he observed one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sky bleed orange into purple. There isn't much to say, she replied. He waited. Finally, she told him. About Caroline. About the last-minute decision. About stepping into someone else's promise. She expected anger, regret, accusation. Instead, Daniel leaned back in his chair and said, You came because you're brave. She shook her head. I came because I had no other choice. Sometimes that's the same thing. The words settled into her like seeds. Months passed. Seasons turned. Eliza transformed the small ranch house. Curtains sewn from flour sacks brightened the windows. A kitchen garden flourished under her careful tending. She began keeping ledgers for the ranch, discovering small ways to reduce waste and increase profit. Daniel found himself relying on her insight more than he had expected. One afternoon, Thomas Whitaker rode up to their fence line. Eliza felt a flicker of old embarrassment when she saw him, but it faded quickly. She was no longer the uncertain girl on the platform. Thomas removed his hat. I owe you both an apology, he said. For what? Daniel asked. For judging too quickly. He looked at Eliza. I heard how you managed the feed shortage last winter. Smart thinking. She nodded politely. Thank you. Thomas shifted awkwardly. Caroline wrote me. Eliza's breath caught. She explained everything. Said she lacked your courage. Guilt and relief tangled together inside her. Thomas continued. I've corresponded with another woman. This time I asked more questions. Listen more. Daniel smiled faintly. That's wise. Thomas mounted his horse again. Looks like things turned out as they were meant to. After he rode away, Eliza stood very still. Do you regret it? Daniel asked quietly. She turned to him. The prairie stretched endless behind him. The house stood solid. Chickens clucked in the yard. The air smelled of earth and promise. No, she said. Years layered themselves gently over their marriage. There were hardships. Drought one summer that nearly cost them half the herd. A winter so harsh the river froze thick as iron. Losses that tested faith. But there were joys too. The first time Eliza laughed freely, without fear of being judged. The night Daniel admitted he no longer felt haunted by his solitude. The birth of their daughter, Grace, whose cries filled the once quiet house with fierce new life. Eliza wrote to Caroline often. Her sister eventually married a schoolteacher in a nearby town. In one letter, Caroline confessed, I used to think you sacrificed your happiness for mine. Now I see you found it in a way I never could have imagined. Eliza folded that letter carefully and placed it in a wooden box beside her bed. One evening, years after that fateful platform meeting, Eliza stood again at the train station. Grace clutched her hand, asking endless questions about the loud engines and billowing smoke. Daniel stood behind them, taller now with streaks of gray at his temples. Another young woman stepped off the train that day, nervous, hopeful, alone. Eliza saw the familiar fear in her eyes. She approached gently. "Are you meeting someone?" she asked. The woman nodded uncertainly. "I believe so." "Good," Eliza said with a reassuring smile. "And if things don't go exactly as planned, sometimes that's where the real story begins." Daniel caught her eye from across the platform. That single sentence, "I'll take her," had once sounded like a practical solution. A spontaneous decision made in the dust and tension of public scrutiny. But it had been more. It had been an act of quiet faith, not just in a stranger, but in possibility. And Eliza understood now that rejection is not always an ending. Sometimes it is simply a redirection toward a life braver and fuller than the one originally imagined. The prairie wind still rolled across the grass. The sky still stretched endless and wide. But for Eliza Carter, it no longer felt overwhelming. It felt like home.